We love to declare things dead. The landline, the bookstore, the wristwatch. We hold the little funeral, we move on, and we feel pretty smart about it. A few years ago, we did the exact same thing to the gasoline engine. Wrote the obituary, picked out the flowers, told each other the future was electric, and the only thing left to argue about was how fast we'd get there. And then, out of a country we'd already shrugged off as the cheap option, a company most of you couldn't pick out of a lineup went and broke a world record that was never supposed to be broken. 48.41% verified on the record by Guinness. The most efficient engine ever bolted into a car. It isn't German, it isn't Japanese, it runs on gasoline, the fuel we all just buried, and it was built in China. This is the story of how the company you never took seriously beat the giants at the one game they swore they owned. We're skipping the textbook today. No founding dates, no dusty timelines, none of the stuff you'd forget by lunch anyway. Because this whole thing really comes down to one number, and one wall that nobody could get over. The number is thermal efficiency, and the question behind it could not be simpler. Of all the fuel you pay for, how much of it actually moves the car? For most of history, the answer was almost insulting, around a fifth. The rest just slips away as heat, as noise, as that warm shimmer coming off your hood in July. You've been buying 5 gallons and burning 1. The other 4 you're basically paying to heat up the road and warm the air. It might be the most expensive campfire you own. And that wall was vicious, because the thing standing in the way was never lazy engineering, it was physics. A Frenchman named Carnot ran the numbers on this 2 centuries ago, before we even had a car to put an engine in. And they still hold up today. Every single time you burn fuel, a big chunk of that heat has to escape, or the engine won't run at all. You never get all of it back, not a chance. So clawing back even 1% up at the top is a bare-knuckle fight with the laws of the universe, and the universe almost never throws the fight. Which is the whole reason Toyota deserves a statue. Toyota chased this single number like it was a religion. 30 years of it, billions of dollars, some of the smartest engine minds alive, locked in a room, clipping away 1 decimal point at a time. Understand, at this level, 0.5% is a real breakthrough. A full percent is somebody's entire career. In 2014, they touched 38%, and the industry practically threw a parade. They fought their way to 40, and grown engineers actually stood up and clapped. And for a solid decade after that, 42% was the roof, the ceiling, the point where the road just stopped. Nobody was climbing over that. Everybody knew it. And then, in walked one company nobody had bothered to watch. Now, here's where I have to stop you, because I can already hear it. Geely who? And that reaction right there, that's the whole story. Because here's the thing almost nobody in the West bothered to learn. Geely didn't start out building cars, it started out building refrigerators. Then it moved to motorcycles, and then the founder, a man named Le Choufie, stood up and announced he was going to build automobiles, and pretty much the entire industry laughed in his face. He didn't exactly help his own case. His big pitch was that a car is, and quoting him, just 4 wheels, a couple of sofas and an engine. That was the vision. They started calling him the car maniac. It was not meant as a compliment. So what did the car maniac do? He went out and bought Volvo, the whole company, paid for around $1.5 billion in cash for one of the most respected, safety-obsessed engineering brands on the planet. The guy who thought a car was 2 sofas on wheels now owned the crown jewel of Sweden. Everyone kept waiting for the punchline, for the cheap Chinese company to embarrass itself. It never came. And he didn't stop there, because Geely is not some knockoff stamping out cheap copies. Geely owns Volvo, all of it. It owns Lotus, the British legend. It owns most of Polestar. It owns Zeekr. It even builds the black cabs of London. It holds a piece of Aston Martin and a chunk of Mercedes itself. Sit with that for a second. The company we quietly filed under bargain bin owns a supercar company, a Formula One engine partner, and the safest cars on Earth. The monster wasn't hiding, it was signing everyone's paychecks. You just weren't looking. And while the West was busy writing the obituary for the gas engine and picking out the flowers, Geely was in a lab building the thing that would break the record. They call the system i-HEV, and the way they cracked that wall wasn't one big miracle. It was a dozen tiny obsessions stacked one on top of the other. And the best one is the trick nobody talks about. So stay with me. First, the Miller cycle. In plain English, they hold the valve open at an unusual moment, so the engine stops wasting effort squeezing air it's about to burn, and wrings every last drop out of the fuel instead of hurling it out the tailpipe. Then they crank the compression to 15.5 to 1. That's the kind of pressure that usually tears an engine apart, that makes it knock and rattle itself to pieces. They tamed it. They fire in the fuel at 500 bar, blasting it into a mist so fine it burns almost completely with nothing left over. Then they hunted friction like it owed them money, chasing it down through the bearings and the pistons and the oil itself, and cut it by more than 16%. But none of that is the knockout. This is. An engine only hits its best inside one tiny sweet spot, a narrow little band of revs where everything lines up just right. Ask it to crawl through traffic or idle at a red light or pull away from a stop and it falls apart, burning fuel just to keep itself spinning. So Geely simply stopped asking. The electric motors do the ugly work, the stop and go, the low-speed crawl, the exact moments an engine quietly hates. The gas engine only ever clocks in when it can be great. And an AI referee decides, second by second, who drives, battery or engine. You never even feel the handoff. They didn't just build a better engine, they built one that only ever shows up at its best. And then they hid all of it from you completely. So in that lab they lit up, and the numbers came back like something out of a fever dream. 48.41%. Guinness sent people out with clipboards because you don't take a claim like that on faith. They watched, they measured, they signed off. And out in the real world, this thing sipped fuel at 106 miles per gallon. Let that sink in for a second. 106 miles on a single gallon. For a lot of people, that's most of a week of driving on less fuel than it takes to fill a lawnmower. A tank so long-lasting, you'd start to forget which side the little fuel door is even on. Now put a name next to that. The Prius, the gold standard, the car that basically invented modern efficiency. It does about 93. Geely didn't just nudge past it. Geely walked into Toyota's house, pulled out a chair at the head of the table, and beat them at the one thing they owned. And here's why you should care, even if you never lay a finger on one. Because the whole industry has been selling you a single story. Combustion is finished. Go electric, please form a line, don't ask questions. And this record raises its hand and says, not so fast. A car this efficient can cross an entire country on a thimble of fuel. No charger, no range anxiety, no standing in a parking lot at midnight watching a battery percentage crawl up while your coffee goes cold. The parts of the world where the nearest fast charger is 1,000 miles away if it exists at all. This is the car that wins there. For most of the planet, that isn't a step backward. It's the answer that was sitting in front of us the whole time. And the part the West really needs to sit with? This was not a win on price. This wasn't China being cheap. This was a win on pure engineering, at the very top, in the one arena Germany and Japan swore they owned forever. But don't you dare turn this into a doom story, it's the opposite. Because now, Toyota answers, Honda answers. Somewhere in Germany, an engineer just spat out his coffee and booked a meeting that's going to ruin somebody's whole quarter. And every one of those answers eventually shows up in your driveway as a better, cheaper, cleaner car. The moment a record falls, everybody starts running faster. That's how this has always worked, and you get to win just by sitting back and watching it happen. For 100 years we told ourselves that world-class engineering only comes from a few old names. Germany, Japan, Detroit. a company that started out making refrigerators, that got laughed out of the room, that didn't even exist when the first Prius was still a sketch, walked up and tore that idea clean in half. The ceiling everyone swore was the limit turned out to be the floor. So, here's where we ended up. We declared the gas engine dead. We declared China the cheap seats. 2 funerals. And we jumped the gun on both. The engine we buried just posted the best number of its life, and the badge sitting on that world record is one hardly anybody saw coming. Geely. Write it down somewhere. You're going to be hearing it a lot. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If this was your kind of thing, hit subscribe and stick around. There's plenty more where this came from. I'll see you in the next story.